Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a somewhat overdue video of me doing a nice little recipe for you all here on Uncle Ted Recipes. Today we're going to be doing beef and ale stew, and here are the ingredients. First off, you'll need either 2 medium or 4 small white onions. Then I'd say probably about 3 to 5 cloves of garlic. I really like garlic myself, so I prefer to use 5, but to each their own. You'll then need some oregano and thyme, purely for seasoning of course, as is kind of easy to guess considering they're both herbs. Then you're also going to need 600 to 800 grams of mixed beans, preferably in tomato sauce or brine possibly. If they are in brine, you'll have to drain them before putting them into the stew. Then you'll need also 650 to 750 grams of preferably red skinned potatoes. Doesn't necessarily have to be red skinned potatoes, but I've used these Bartlett ones and they're pretty good. You're then going to need about 400 to 600 grams of castrol steak beef, because this is kind of pretty good for like braising and just stewing and letting slow cook in a sauce and such, so that would be very useful. You'll then need a few hundred grams of just some mixed green vegetables. I've picked out some green runner beans, Brussels sprouts and stem broccoli here. Nice mixture of flavours and textures. The Brussels sprouts will get really soft, whereas, say, the broccoli and the snaps will stay quite nice and crunchy. Then the pièce de la résistance is the 250 to 375 millimeters of Belgian blonde ale. Now, to start off with the cooking method, you'll first need to prepare your potatoes. What you'll need to do is cut them into halves and then quarters, and then dice up the quarters as you can see me doing here. While you're doing this, you must always, and I mean always, keep your hand on the flat side of the knife in order to keep it stable, and also to keep your hands away from being, well, basically sliced up pretty much. After that, you put all the potatoes into a colander, pour some cold water over it, and then leave it to drain for a little bit. You then cut off the non-stem parts of the onions, and then proceed to cut off any nasty bits, as you can see me doing here. The thing with this onion was that it basically had like a little bit of extra skin underneath on one of the layers of flesh, so I had to cut that off. And then after you do that, you cut the onions in half, slice them up to the tip of the roots, and then dice them up like you can see here. And if there's any excess around the bits of the roots left over, you just lop them off, while also keeping your fingers well away from the blade if you can do so. The reason why I cut up my onions like that is basically just so it keeps the onion nice and stable when you're grabbing it while you're chopping it up. After that, you then put the onions in a pot with some oil at a mid to high heat, chuck in some salt, give it a little stir, and then what you're going to do is you're going to put on a lid. That way you're going to keep in the moisture and let the onions stew a little bit and produce a bit more moisture than they normally would have. You then prepare the garlic. I usually like to prepare my garlic with my thumbs sort of like peeling away the garlic skin, or you can use the knife as a lever to cut off some of the excess skin around the edges. However, that does risk losing a bit of the garlic flesh, so I'd really just use your thumbs and such. You then take each clove of garlic and you use the flat side of your knife to basically just crush it and sort of wiggle around, make sure you get it all crushed nice and flat as you possibly can, and then you do that to each individual clove as much as you can. Do be careful with the knife and try not to cut your palm, hence the reason why I would say put your palm on the flatter side of the knife and keep your fingers slightly elevated away from the sharp edge of the knife, just so you don't cut yourself, and try and do it on a flat surface as well, so you don't lose any grip or sustainability of, well, not wanting to cut your own fingers off essentially. You then dice up the garlic into as little bits as possible, essentially in the same way that you might usually dice up fresh herbs. Just keep chopping it up, scooping it back into a big pile, and then just chopping the garlic into as small bit of pieces as you possibly can, all the while keeping both hands on the knife as to keep it from slipping and cutting yourself. You then put the garlic into the onions. Again, apologies about the steam misting up the camera there. But you put the garlic into the onions, give it a little stir around, and then let it simmer for a bit. and then you put in the potatoes, stir them in so they get all nice and mixed in with the onions, garlic and oil and salt. Give them a nice stir, put the lid on, and then about 5 minutes later you add in a little bit more oil just in case the potatoes and onions and all that are getting a little bit dry. Then give it another little stir, after which you could put in a little bit more salt, but I'd leave that till a bit later. At which point I would put in the ale after the potatoes have been given 10 minutes to sort of settle. Then give that another about 5 or 10 minutes just for the alcohol to pasteurise. You then chuck in the beef. Again, give it a little stir, kind of just see how it browns up. And then you chuck in basically everything else. First off the beans, so you get a nice bit of tomatoey-ness and get a little bit of extra thickness in the stew right there. As you can see, the colours are starting to mix very, 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 very nicely in there. You then chuck in the greens. Again, like with the potatoes, I'd say prepare the greens right at the start of the process of cooking this recipe, and then chuck them in another colander, pour some cold water over them and let them drain for a bit. And after you've done that and mixed the greens in sufficiently enough, you chuck in all the seasoning, oregano, thyme, a little bit of extra salt, and then my special favourite little addition is about 4 or 5 tablespoons, or teaspoons rather, of nice French Dijon mustard. This type of mustard isn't too spicy, so don't worry, for any of those of you with sensitive stomachs it won't harm you too much. You then stir it in, and what I like to do here is I also like to add in a little bit of boiled water, just so the stew isn't too thick and that it doesn't like congeal and burn while you're leaving it to slow cook. What you then do is you leave it to slow cook for about 3 to 5 hours on a very, very low heat. And after about 3 to 5 hours of letting it slow cook, you should have a very nicely flavoured and fall off the bone tasting kind of beef and ale stew. I definitely recommend this to be served with either a pale ale or a beer, and if you guys have any suggestions for future recipes, leave them in the comments section below. And if you like this video, be sure to leave a like, comment, share and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time in the kitchen. Bye bye for now.